Good morning and welcome to our warehouse service. We're so glad that you're here. Will you please stand with us and join us for worship? you. Before you get seated, go grab a cup of coffee, see somebody you hadn't seen for a minute, and we'll do our meet and greet for a few minutes. Schedule of the events for this week will be in your bulletin like normal. I wanted to let everybody know that next Sunday at 12 o'clock we will be doing a soup social and a dessert auction. This is for the children's department and the youth group, and it usually raises a lot of money. So it's super good for both of the departments. We are having communion today, and the Methodist Church, we do an open communion, meaning anybody in congregation today is welcome to our communion. Just follow the directions of the ushers and everyone going towards the ushers. During the next song, we will take up our offering. Buckets and baskets will be passed. Your regular offering or tithes that goes to the church will be in the baskets, and the change or loose bills will go in the buckets. That is used for local missions that we do. You can also give through Venmo, which is up on the screen. And we will be right back after this next song.
All morning.
Good morning.
All you beautiful people. Welcome to Camilla Methodist or the Warehouse. I am not sure if you're familiar with that. In more of the mainline thinking, they celebrate something called, my ear's getting too big. My wife keeps pulling it. All Saints Day. And to give you a flavor for it, I have a little story I'd like to share about Methodist preaching. Now, it wasn't me. And they had some trouble with the building. It wasn't me. And they needed about $1 million to fix the building. Well, at the same time, there were these two brothers that lived in the town, kind of like ours, and they were scoundrels. They hung out with the corn mafia, and they sold crack, and they robbed a few banks, and they had quite a few DUIs, and if there was any crime involved in their little town, they were part of it. Never went to church, and they were mean brothers. In fact, they tried to out-mean each other all the time. Well, one of the brothers died. So the second brother that was living decided he was going to give his brother a church funeral. And they went from preacher to preacher, said, "Can you bury my brother?" Says, "You know, it'd be easier to bury the devil and bury your brother." Well, finally they came to the Methodist preacher. You know, us Methodist preachers, we don't know how to say no. He said, "Look, I'll give you $1 million, fix your building, if you bury my brother and say that he was a saint. If you can just almost like preach him into heaven." How many of you ever been to a funeral and you know the guy was a scoundrel, or the guy was a scoundrel and preach him into heaven? And you're like, that's not the person I knew. I'm not sure who you got up in the coffin, but that's not the one I knew. So the preacher thought about it and said, "Okay, I'll tell you what. You're such a scoundrel. If you write me a check on the spot for $1 million and it doesn't bounce, I'll do the funeral." Guy wrote the check, cleared. So he did the funeral, and he got up and he started preaching, and he said, "You know, this man, he was connected to the mafia. He sold drugs, and he pumped. He was one evil. He had a bunch of DUIs. He had a rap sheet long as your arm. And as he was going on, the brother that wrote the check was getting angrier and trying to figure out how he's going to get his money back. And all the people that were sitting there, their names were mentioned, and just about everybody in the church was mad at him. And before he could go any further, he looked up and he said, "You know, as evil as he was, compared to his brother, he was a saint." And so that's what we're going to look at, the sainthood. What does it mean to be a saint? What does it mean to be a Christian? If you look at the Catholic faith, they have a bunch of things you have to do to reach sainthood. In fact, they have to actually vote on you for you to get it. So one of the things you have to do is you have to work miracles, to bring people from the dead, back from the dead, or pray for them and actually get them healed. You have to do just all sorts of wonderful, kind deeds like Mother Teresa. Or you need to be known almost for your acts of kindness, like St. Francis of Assisi, or St. Benedict, or the guy that went to Ireland and ran all the snakes off, St. Patrick. That's their thinking of what a saint is. But that's not what the Bible says. In our gospel today, in Luke chapter 20, my first text talks about these Pharisees coming to Jesus and saying, "Jesus, if one of your brothers dies and the next brother-in-law marries a sister like he's supposed to, and he dies, and the next brother marries a sister and he dies, what happens when they all get to heaven because they're all married to the same lady? And Jesus, being very clever, says, you know, that just shows you your lack of belief. Because when you get to heaven, there's no giving or taking in marriage, because after all, it's populated and people will never ever die. You will live forever. You will have in peace and harmony. And so the idea is that we'll be together forever and ever and ever. And there'll be no crying and hurting. But on earth, that really doesn't help us on what it means to be a saint. There was a time I used to think to become a saint you had to go to a monastery and live in a monastery like a monk, you know, and pray all day and have wonderful sanctifying thoughts and those kinds of things. But I found it pretty quickly that is not easy to do. I used to go to Bible college and I found some of the naughtiest people were Bible scholars. They used to get all sorts of mischief. I went to a holiness school, and my job was first painting outside, but people couldn't understand my accent and didn't like the way I did stuff, so in the end I landed up cleaning the professor's main lecture room and the piano rooms. And I found that many young couples, we had a no 6 inch, we had a no touch rule. You had to stay 6 inches from your boyfriend or girlfriend. You couldn't touch them or put your arm around them in church or anything like that. You can't. But in fact, I condone it. So if you're married this morning, feel free to put your arm around your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend. But anyway, I would go and clean pianos and clean piano rooms, and I found quite a few people sitting there, and they weren't playing piano, and they weren't following the 6 inch rule. In fact, I'm not sure if they were doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation or what, but there was a lot of making out going on over there that was supposed to be reported. I never reported them, and I thought I could probably make a fortune bribery, but never did. But that doesn't help us what it means to be a saint. I don't think sainthood has anything really to do with what we do. And this is an important task, because once you become a Christian, the question is, how do you live a Christian life? John Wesley talks about doing all the good you can, in all the places you can, to all the people you can. And that might be a good idea. Another way of looking at it is we quite often is to be a good Christian, number one, do no harm. I mean, that's a good idea. If you're not doing harm, you stay out of a lot of trouble, right? But you know how hard it is not to do any harm? Number two, do good. And then follow the ordinances of the church. One day, Jesus was preaching, and he tried to teach people what it meant to be holy. And it comes out in his Sermon on the Mount. In fact, his Sermon on the Mount is a very, very powerful sermon, and it is stricter than the Old Testament. That's why I kind of worry why people say, you know, I'm a New Testament person. I'm not an Old Testament person. Well, the New Testament's a little stricter than the Old Testament. He says, you know, in the New Testament, you know, if you think you don't commit adultery. Since I did a wedding last night, it's on my brain. If you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you've committed adultery. In other words, fellas, if you go down to the Gulf Coast and you're sitting over there, and it's one of those years where there's a little bit of a cotton shortage, and then bikinis are a little bit smaller than they need to be, and not much has been hidden away, and you kind of like more what you see than you should, you've committed adultery. It's likewise for ladies. You know, if you read that Knowles and Broom's book and you like it a little bit more than you're supposed to, or that historical novel, and then hoochie-coochie books that you can get in the library, that's adultery. You know, you say, you know, you don't murder people. If you get angry at a person for no reason, that's just as bad as murder. That's what Jesus was preaching in the Sermon on the Mount. But then thank goodness, he comes up, well, what does it mean to be a Christian? And he starts out with the blesseds or the happies, or this is what a Christian looks like. And the first one is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. So if you are a Christian and you recognize your poverty of spirit, you might be going on the right route to being a Christian. And that is about as Jeff Foxworthy as I can say it. If you have poverty of spirit, you just might be on the right road to being a Christian. When you recognize that you can't make it out, you can't make it in, or you can't make it through the day without Jesus, you might be on the right road to being a Christian. You might be on the way to the kingdom of heaven. Number 2, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. There are many preachers that get up on Sunday morning and tell you that you will have the victory, and that if you give your heart to Jesus, I say that southern enough, give your heart to Jesus, your life will be peaches and cream. And that if you're a Christian, you will have no harm come to you. And that if you're a Christian, life will be easy. They're lying. They just flat out lying. One of the hardest lives you'll ever live is the life of a Christian. You will mourn. You will lose loved ones. You will get sick. You have difficult times at school. You will have difficult times in your marriage. Your children will give you a hard time. Well, Dad, if you're such a good Christian, why did you do that? Well, I'm just following your example. But you will have heartache in being a Christian. So, you might be on the right path to Christianhood if you've mourned like Jesus mourned. Good news, you will be comforted by fellow Christians in the church, by Jesus. Number 3, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. So if you're a meek person, you might be well on the way to being a child of God. You might be well on the way to being a Christian, a saint of God. Meekness doesn't mean a doormat. Have you ever heard the saying, be wise as a wolf, but gentle as a dove? Being meek is being able to be with a little baby, and gentle, to be there when people are at their most tender moment, and to be able to sit with them, and at the same time not give up your masculinity. Meekness is an important part of being a child of God or sainthood. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. If you hunger for righteousness, if you hunger for justice, you might be well on your way to being a saint or a Christian or a child of God. I promise you, If you look at the judicial system anywhere in the world, you will not find justice. As far as I can tell, rich people get a whole lot more justice than poor people. I've been in many prisons and seen people there that should not be in prison. Either they were railroaded or somebody was running for office, and that's how they ended up in prison. I've seen people that couldn't tell right from wrong sitting in prison. I've seen innocent people in prison. And I've seen guilty people in prison. I've been in schools where teachers abuse children. I've been in schools where right and wrong is not being taught. So if you're a young person or old person or whatever your age is, and you're hungry for justice and righteousness, and you're tired of bullies and the evil, you might be well on your way to being a Christian. I might even throw things like the economy and ecosystem. Because if you strive for that, our planet and our justice system and our politics may be a little bit better to bear. Then he goes on and he says, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall be shown merciful." If you're a merciful person, you might be on your way to being a Christian or a saint. Not many people show mercy anymore. If you get somebody and you know you love them, you don't have to beat them down any further. One of the hardest things I've ever learned to do, and I'm still learning to do, is, you know, when I'm right and my wife's wrong, just to accept it and not bear down on it. How many of us like to be right and rub our noses, our spouse's noses in it? If you want to be happy, fellas, listen to these words. Yes, ma'am, you're right. And if you're wrong, yes, ma'am, you're right. I was watching on TikTok, the fella and his wife were going to Las Vegas to do a little gig. And his wife had a little baby, and she packed all the baby food, about 20 pounds of it, into a cooler. And off they went to Las Vegas. When they started unpacking in the hotel, guess what happened? She looked in the cooler and she said, "Oh man, the food's spoiled." And he was like, "Well, should I go with my first response, my second response, or do I want to stay married?" First response would be something like, "You know, just because it's cooler doesn't mean you can't not put ice with it. You need to put ice in the cooler to keep it cool." He kind of said that. She said, "But it's an ice maker. You don't need to put ice in the ice maker. It's a cooler, you know. It just cools." And he said, "You know, you're right, baby. Who in the right man will sold you a broken cooler where it can't keep it cool?" There's this idea of being with your spouse even though it doesn't always make sense. I ride all the time, and I'm just glad my wife's not here. And have you noticed what voice that GPS comes in? A lady's voice. I think ladies invented GPS. The first thing I ever do when I get a GPS, change it to a man's voice, just because anyway, maybe that's me. Now I'm going to Medley. But anyway, you need to be merciful. John Wesley, Mama, used to have this rule. If she caught her children doing something naughty and she said, "Did you do it?" and they were honest, she wouldn't spank them. She would be merciful. But if they lied about it, then they would get a spanking. Sometimes it's important to be merciful to our children. Sometimes it's important to be merciful to your preacher. I need it all the time. You may be well on your way to being a Christian if you're pure in heart. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. If you have to look at your heart this morning, your soul, and I say to you, how is it with your soul this morning? Doctors will ask you how it is with your body. Psychologists will ask how it is with your mind, and your thinking and your relationships. But only preachers will ask, how is it with your soul? Is your soul tormented? Are you consuming information that makes you feel ugly? Are you watching things that don't help you grow closer to Jesus? How is it with your soul? What are you putting in your soul? Is it good, pure, and holy? If you have a pure heart, you will see God. My second last one, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons and daughters of God. Anybody can pick a fight in the church. Anybody can start something. Anybody can make a meeting miserable. I remember being in a board meeting one day, and we were trying to put a bathroom in our fellowship hall, and this one fellow voted yes. And when I looked again, he voted no. And then he voted yes. And then he voted no. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those that help you bring peace to the world. As a young child, I tried to stop a few fights, and guess what? I got beat up. And I found out it's very common. In fact, police, their least favorite place to go to is a domestic call. Why? Because when spouses are fighting and the policeman shows up, they both turn on the policeman. And so they are taught how to separate husbands and wives and children and take one of them away so that there'll be less murders. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons and daughters of God. It takes a special kind of person to keep the peace. Blessed are those who are persecuted for because of me. I'm told that, very often that if you're Christian, people will look fondly on you and say, he's such a wonderful person, but he's a Christian. But that's not really what happens. What do they call people that are Christian or try to live by the grace of God? That hypocrite goes to church all the time. Well, look how he's living. And finally, blessed are you when people insult you. Why? Because that's what they did to Jesus. You see, Christians, we know what we need to do because it's right there in the Beatitudes. But the difference is, we will fall. We will mess up. I fall and mess up all the time. And I'm a preacher. I should know better. But I fall and mess up. The difference is, I get up, and try again. Reminds me of a story of an old mule. The mule that bucked somebody and killed the poor person, and they said, we're going to kill this mule, and we're going to bury the thing alive because it's useless. They took that mule and dug a big old hole and threw the mule in there and started to throw dirt on the mule, landed on his back, and the mule shook the dirt off and stamped it down and threw another load of dirt on the mule, and the mule shook it off and stamped it down. On and on and on. They just poured stuff upon stuff upon stuff upon the mule. And the mule shook it off and stamped it down. And finally the hole was full. And the mule stepped out of the hole and went on with its life. To be a saint of God, we try and keep the Beatitudes, but we will fail because we're human. The difference is, every time we fail, we get up, shake off the dirt, stamp it down, and try again. That's what makes a saint of God. And I pray that you will never, ever give up trying to do what God calls you to do. Let us pray and bless the elements, and then I'm going to ask the musicians to receive the elements, and then we will invite